4 chilling true stories featuring Stuart Schlomach. A link to his channel is in the description. In some of these stories, it seems I'll be playing a female. Just an FYI. A teenager thought my sister was alone and tried to follow us home, by Voldemort 7. Before I moved a few months ago, I was spending time with my younger sister who just turned 12. I'm 22 for reference. My sister has recently gotten into really girly things like painting nails and doing glitter paintings of ponies. Not even kidding. One night, she asked me if she could paint my nails, which I agreed to. Only we didn't have any nail polish in the house. Since it was fairly late at night, around 9 PM, I decided to take her to the 24-hour Walmart near our home. While at Walmart, I left my sister in the nail polish aisle and went literally one aisle over to grab some eyeliner from the makeup aisle. When I came back, I noticed my sister uncomfortably crouching near the nail polish while a teenage boy stood over. This boy was around 17 to 19, thin, blonde, unkempt looking. As I approached, I could hear him talking to my sister in a low voice. "How old are you? Are you here by yourself?" This might make more sense if my sister was a very young child, but she's definitely preteen looking, not young enough to look like she's just lost in a store. I could see that she was staring at him, petrified. Strangers never just approach her out of nowhere and start talking to her. So I walked up and said, "Hey, did you find what you wanted?" while giving the teenager an unimpressed look. Instead of skedaddling, this guy turned and gave me an assessing stare right back. His eyes were very flat and very still, but his mouth kept twitching into several versions of the same weird smile. I noticed that he had a really nasty scar on his throat. I stood next to my sister and waited for him to go, but instead, he cooed to her. "How old is your sister?" And then, when I didn't answer, "Does she want to hang out too?" Without saying a word, I pulled my sister away and we went to the other side of the store. I asked her who that guy was and she had no idea. After a few minutes of shopping around, I forgot about the encounter until we came back outside to the parking lot. As I was loading our stuff into the car, I noticed the same teenager walk out of Walmart, pushing an empty shopping cart. I saw him look around, just leave the shopping cart in the middle of the lot, and then run off to his car. I thought he was a weirdo and didn't give any more thought to it. I had to go left when leaving the parking lot to get back home, but the street had a median so that turning left was impossible, and there were no U-turns allowed for a mile down the way, so I decided to take a right out of the parking lot, turn left into a neighborhood, flip a U-turn there, and then head home. I hope that makes sense. As I was doing this stupidly complicated procedure in order to get us in the direction of home, I noticed a car tailing us out of the Walmart parking lot. It was the same car I had seen a teenager get into, which started to give me the creeps. I could see that there was only one person driving the car, a man, so I'm 99% sure it was him. By the time I turned into this random neighborhood, I was positive he was genuinely following me. Just to be sure, I began speeding up. Sure enough, the car sped up too, so that we were both going 40 to 50 in this residential neighborhood. I took 6 completely random turns just to see again if this person was really following. Most of the turns made at the complete last second, and he stayed right on my tail, matching my speed, taking every turn. I told my little sister to dial 911 and press call if this guy kept following us. Luckily, we weren't in our actual neighborhood. But then I realized, with all of the random turns, I'd actually managed to get kind of lost and couldn't remember where the exit to the main road was. Meanwhile, this guy was speeding up so much that he was nearly hitting the back of my car. He starts laying into the horn, long honks that shattered the silence of this dark, empty neighborhood. I couldn't fathom why he would do that since he probably woke up all of the people we drove past. I had no idea what to do. I was lost. I didn't know where the neighborhood exit was. and I was just helplessly circling around this place while some creep tailed the shit out of me. The guy unrolled his window and started waving at me. Not frantic, "Hey, wait, stop" waves either, but taunting, "Toodaloo" waves. I was dumbfounded. I literally told my sister, "What the fuck?" It all ended when another car turned onto the same street we were zooming down, so that they were directly behind him. He slowed down for some reason while I sped ahead, and I managed to get to the neighborhood exit and back onto the main road before he could catch up. By the time I made it home a few miles away, there was no sign of him. My sister and I didn't speak of the incident again, but it's always really bothered me. He was probably an asshole teenager just looking to scare a girl and her kid sister because he had nothing better to do, because I really can't think of why he would act that way. My sister said she was at the same Walmart with my mom and thought she saw him hanging around the makeup department again, but luckily, he didn't see her. Maybe he only zeroes in on the girls he thinks are alone. Anyway, asshole teenager who creeps on preteen girls, let's not meet again, but if we do, I will probably try to hurt you. The Mass Murderer Next Door by INM Throwaway 5. I was 12 years old when this happened. I was in 5th grade. My childhood was kinda crazy though, and was held back a year from all the moving around, so in 5th grade, we had just moved to a small town in Texas from Dallas where my mom's most recent marriage had failed. I wasn't used to small towns and pretty gullible for my age. We moved into a small little house, almost a little shack, but it was in the older part of town. I'm not sure if all the states have neighborhoods like this, but in Texas, the historical districts of smaller towns are odd in that they originally built very large, very nice houses right next to small crappy ones. The old nice ones seem to mostly remain nicely restored where the smaller ones fall into despair. So you have these strange neighborhoods where one block is full of very well-to-do people in nice old homes driving luxury cars right next to a block that feels like a third world ghetto. I lived in the ghetto block. My school was about 4 blocks away. The bus wouldn't even pick you up so close, and my mom didn't own a car, so I walked to school and walked by this house every day. Even here it stood out. Huge, 2-story home, red brick, large white columns porch. The yard was immaculate. It looked like someone wealthy must live there, and being so poor, that was impressive to me. I'd also heard stories about the owner. He would yell at kids and throw rocks, spray the water hose at anyone who tried to cut across his yard. It was a large corner lot, and he always seemed to be outside on my way to and from school, but never said anything to me, so I never gave it much thought. I had been walking by for about a month before he ever said anything to me. I should say here that even though I was only 12, I was tall for my age and developing early. I also really dressed inappropriately. Not really on purpose, but I was growing. We were poor, and my clothes fit poorly. And Texas was very, very hot without air conditioning at home, so I wore as little as possible. I was not completely stupid though, and didn't mind the attention from teenage guys. I really didn't have any friends as we moved so often. About a month after walking by, he talked to me for the first time. He just said, "Hi, sure is hot out here," or something along those lines. I just agreed with him and said I was dying, I was so hot, and he offered me a soda. I don't know why I agreed. I guess I just really did want a soda, and he brought me over an unopened one. After this, he would talk to me every day. Not long conversations, just about the weather, school, where I was from, etc. He looked a little creepy, honestly. Always wore a cap. Had that look that people get from working outside all their lives, coupled with probably chain smoking and a poor diet. But this house was so nice for some reason, I decided he must be a nice person too. After a month of passing by and short small talk, he mentioned he had a pool and if I wanted to see it. It was late May now, and that sounded good to me as he had seemed trusting, and again, I was really stupid. He brought me through the house, and I checked out the pool. I'd never seen someone who had a pool at their home. It seemed unbelievable. He said I could swim anytime I wanted, and then for the first time, looked at me, and it's like his whole demeanor changed, and said, "I'd love to see those tits and that ass. Damn, we don't wear clothes here." Honestly, it wasn't even the words. It was the way he said it, the immediate change in demeanor, the tone of voice. I felt I was in serious danger, but I had no idea what to do. He then grabbed at my shorts, as if he was going to pull them down, and I started crying. It's like he zoomed back to reality, laughed, and stepped away and said, "Well, anytime you want, you better get going," and I left for the gate. I never told anyone and started walking another way to school until summer started. Next school year, I thankfully never saw him outside his house. Then the second month after school started, I hear from my mom a crazy story. He had driven his truck into a Luby's in a close-by town. He shot 48 people that day. 24 died. He killed himself. Also, apparently, he was stalking 2 of my neighbors. I still don't know how to process all this information. It creeps the hell out of me, to this day. Some of the information regarding the Luby's massacre is posted below. The Men in Masks by XXX2, narrated by Stuart Schlomach.
The scariest moment of my life occurred when I was 10 and in 4th grade. The reason I remember that distinctly was because the incident happened a week before my birthday in March of the year 2003. The clarity of the 15-minute or so ordeal has stuck with me to this day, and it really messed me up for about 5 years. After this event, I told my friend, who was immediately intrigued, and he was the one who suggested to post it to this subreddit. The day that turned into a horror story for me started off on a rather exciting note. My parents informed me that for the first time ever, I would be staying home alone for a little while, since they were going to a party until midnight, and my younger brother, who was about 9, was going to sleep over at his friend's house a few blocks away. Now this probably doesn't sound like much, but let me tell you, to a 4th grader, that kind of independence seems incredible. Evening comes, and I remember spending most of the night from 6 to 10 p.m. playing GameCube without my parents enforcing their usual limits. Now, before I get into the part where my night went downhill, allow me to give some background information on where I lived. My neighborhood in southeast Michigan was filled with mostly middle to upper class homes and was spread out fairly spaciously. It isn't like giant 4-acre country plots, but there's a good 100 yards in between houses. Enough room for privacy, but close enough to feel like a community. I lived in a 3-level home about 4 minutes into the subdivision from the main road. So at 10 p.m., my developing self-control told me I should probably stop playing video games and head upstairs for some rest. I brushed my teeth and decided to read in bed until I got tired. After 10 minutes of reading, the chime on the doorbell suddenly snapped me out of my peaceful state. I lay in bed for a second, and then cautiously walked out of my room. I stood on the landing of the top floor, peering down into the darkness of the main floor, and I jumped as the doorbell rang 2 more times. My young mind was racing, and I was thinking of all the possibilities of who it could be. Was it my parents coming home early? They would have just used the garage, right? Was it my brother's friend who lived next door? Well, it seemed kind of late for that. I didn't turn on the light to the stairway, but instead slowly started to descend the stairs to go to the door. My stairs are 5 feet to the left of the front door, and when I was halfway down them, I could clearly look out the decorative half circle of glass that is at the top of the door. What I saw gave me one of those moments where you can feel your whole body flush with hot blood as the adrenaline kicks in and your heart rate rapidly accelerates. Facing the front door were 3 men in masks. I only glanced for a second, but they are ingrained in my memory forever. All 3 masks were grotesque Halloween style with wiry hair sticking out in all directions on the back. In a split second, I ran back up the stairs debating what to do. This was pre-cell phones, so I couldn't call my parents, and I foolishly thought at the time the police would be mad or wouldn't believe such a young kid dialing 911. I crept into my upstairs bathroom that was directly over the front door to get another look at the men in the masks, and I remember shaking from fear. Sense was quickly leaving me, and I mistakenly turned the light on in the bathroom. I crawled to the blinds and I pushed one up to get a view. The 3 men were standing there, but I also saw a 4th masked person crouched underneath a large pine tree in my front yard, holding an object I didn't immediately recognize. Over the years, I have speculated either a camera or a firearm, but I never knew for sure. However, in my haste, the slot of light streaming out of the window quickly caught their attention and they gazed up at me. I'm sure my small figure was outlined by the light, and this led them to start banging on the door and beckoning me to come down. I stood there with tears streaming down my face, me looking down at the 4 figures in masks, through a gap in the blinds, them staring right back at me. Suddenly, they left the front door and went by the side of the house. I ran to my room, turning off all the lights and huddling under my desk and hiding. I could hear the motion light by the sliding glass door facing my backyard clicking on and off over the next 15 minutes, but I didn't dare look outside. I braced myself to hear pounding on the downstairs back windows, and at any moment it felt like I would hear glass shattering and them barging inside. Crying, shivering, not feeling safe inside my own house had to be some of the worst 15 minutes of my life, especially at such a young age. Thankfully, after a while, the motion light shut off for good. There was no trace of them. My parents came home to me wedged in between the wall and the bed in the guest room, eyes wide with fear. I told them what happened, and my dad explained to me there wasn't really any evidence or anything for the police to track. For a few years, I became super protective of my brother and wouldn't let him go outside alone for fear of the masked men. I thankfully never had any other encounters, but it still fucked me up pretty bad for quite a while, as stated before.
The Tapper Who Killed My Dog by Buffy Throwaway. I'm an 18-year-old girl living in a very isolated rural area. I live with my parents and my 3 younger siblings, and they're great. Because there aren't many people here, everyone knows everyone, and my parents and siblings have some pretty solid friendships. There aren't any other teenagers my age around, and I go to school in the city, so I'm kinda left to my own devices most of the time. It started when I was around 12. I was very tall and lanky. I'm a 5'9", fairly toned and lean from sports blonde girl now, and just tripping through the preteen barrier to adolescence. I used to take a lot of long walks with my Sheltie, Buffy, exploring the area and spending days outside with my packed lunch and my dog. I was walking alongside the creek one day, chatting away to Buffy and tapping a big stick against rocks, when I felt a cold shiver. I could feel someone watching me. Buffy's hackles were raised, and she was turning from side to side and straining at her leash. At first I thought, it's just a farmer. He'll just tell me to leave. It's fine. But I stayed glued to the spot. I physically could not move. Buffy was emitting a low, continuous guttural growl, something I'd never heard her do. By this point, I was terrified. I couldn't let Buffy off her leash or she'd be shot by a farmer. But I didn't want to move. I could hear the waterlogged grass being walked on, and being a typical 12-year-old, I shouted, "I have a vicious dog here, and she'll rip your throat out and eat it for lunch." No answer. I let out a sigh of relief, and my body relaxed. I started to pick up my backpack and get ready to walk home, when I heard it. A chilling, high-pitched laugh. Not a woman's laugh, nothing I recognized. Buffy was going crazy at this point, barking and pulling so much that she was hurting my hand. The laugh continued, getting louder. I started running home, taking shortcuts through fields. I looked back at one point and saw a tall figure leaning against one of the trees where I had been playing by the water, still laughing with this eerie grin on her face. I didn't tell my parents when I got home. My brother was mid-diagnosis and my parents had enough to deal with, and I thought that big girls didn't have to tell their parents everything. From then on, I started getting the feeling that I was constantly being watched. From my adventures with Buffy, to walking to the bus stop for school or to the shop for milk, someone was there. Buffy never calmed down on our walks, and instead of walking ahead, she would stay at my heels. This carried on for a year. I never saw the person in the daylight, but I would hear a laugh or see a shadow, and as soon as I looked around, it would be gone. I was 14 when it escalated. I'm the only person that sleeps downstairs, and I sleep in the front bedroom, so it's easy to see my room from the footpath. I have both a roller blind and curtains for my large window, and these were always closed from 6:30 p.m. onwards. Mum's rule. When I say Buffy and I were inseparable, I mean it. The only time we were apart was when I was at school. I was reading with my torch around 1 a.m. one night, Buffy warming my legs, when the tapping started. Light tapping on my window that started getting louder and louder. It sounded like someone had a key or a coin and was using it to tap the window. Buffy had stiffened as soon as it started, but she was quiet, just staring at the window. I had frozen completely and shut my eyes closed tight and hid under my duvet trying to make it go away. The tapping kept going on until about 4:30 a.m. Once again, I didn't tell my parents because I told myself that it was just a hungry bird or something and that they would give out to me for making a fuss about nothing. The tapping began to be a regular thing, happening every second night and always starting at 1 a.m. I started sleeping in the living room, sneaking in with Buffy and my blanket after my parents had gone to bed, and then going back into my room when the tapping had stopped. I thought I had outsmarted the tapping, but then it started on the sitting room window. It was faster, angrier. Just to clarify, the tapping never happened while my parents were awake. They both work in an emergency room setting, doctor and nurse, so whenever they're home, they're pretty beat. This carried on for a year, along with the continuous feeling of being followed. The person never revealed themselves to me, but made their presence known. I was constantly on edge and tired all the time. I was irritable and anxious and never at ease. It was around then when the attempts to snatch or kill Buffy started. First time, someone left some poisoned meat outside my house. Just blatantly poisoned and gone off meat on my garden path, which we found when my little sister went to pick it up while I was playing with her outside. Second time, I arrived home from school to an empty house, which wasn't unusual. Mum often brought the guys swimming or to the playground on her days off. I'd forgotten my key, so I went around the back to dig up the spare key when I saw that the outdoor doghouse had been destroyed. To me, it looked like a huge hammer or an axe or something had been used, but I don't know much about that stuff. Understandably, I was freaked out. But we had been keeping Buff inside for the past week or two because she had a chest infection. The thought that someone had entered my back garden to hurt my baby made me really upset and seriously pissed off too. I called my dad and left a message to one of the nurses because my mom wasn't answering her phone. After getting inside, I locked all the doors and windows and closed all the curtains and sat on the kitchen floor with Buffy, where I just dissolved and cried and fell asleep. At around 6 p.m, I woke up to the tapping noise, which stopped as soon as I went to the window and banged on it. I didn't look outside, which would have been a good idea, but I was tired and wasn't thinking. When my mom eventually got home with the kids, I explained what I had found when I got home, and she dismissed it as some random kids fucking about. There was a short period of peace from this person for 10 months. I was attacked and pretty horrendously sexually assaulted at that time, and was in hospital for a few weeks, separate incident to the stalking. I started back at school, and the tapping and uneasy feeling of being watched was back. I would hear another set of footsteps when walking alone, the laughter, heavy breathing. I was in an exam year at school, and given that I want to be a doctor, mediocre grades were not an option. I would go to the library every day to study because my siblings were way too loud. I got to know the librarians pretty well, and they would save me my favorite desk and bring me tea. Great ladies. One day, however, one of the librarians called me over. I hadn't been in the day before because I had been at my sister's communion, and apparently a young man had asked the librarians if they knew where I was, that he was my boyfriend and he'd organized to meet me here. Rita told him that the comings and goings of the customers were not her business, and he left. She described him as being slightly off and asked if he was telling the truth. This freaked the shit out of me. At this point, I still hadn't told my parents, and while the tapping was no longer 2 to 3 times a week, it still happened at least once a week, just so they could remind me that they were there. She didn't have much to say about how he looked, just said he was a tall, skinny guy with brown hair. The revelation was soon forgotten the next day, when Buffy was hit by a car that went out of its way to hit her, then sped off. I didn't see it happen, but my younger brother did. She had never gotten out of the garden before, so my dad checked out the gate and found the lock had been unscrewed. It was one of those slidey ones, and one of the hinges had been unscrewed. I was devastated, especially when my brother said the car had deliberately swerved to hit her. I held her on the road, and we got her to the vet as soon as we could. But she didn't make it. I still think it was him. After that, it stopped. Just like that. No more tapping. No laughing. Nothing. I ended up telling my parents everything, and they were besides themselves with anger towards the person and sadness that I didn't tell them. I'm afraid to walk anywhere alone, and I now have a bedroom across from my parents. I'm going to be attending the university in my hometown instead of the capital, and while I will be studying medicine, I'm disappointed. I'd always dreamed in studying in the capital's uni since my parents toured it when I was a child. I find them a lot more suspicious of everything. I can't be alone in the house, or I freak out.